Agent Vor'Xel had studied hundreds of species across the stars, infiltrating civilizations that thought themselves untouchable. He had dismantled governments from within, watched empires collapse under the weight of their own weaknesses, and sent entire planetary populations into ruin, all without ever being noticed. But humans? They were supposed to be nothing more than a curiosity, a primitive species on the verge of technological adolescence. The Galactic Dominion had ignored them for centuries, assuming they would either destroy themselves or remain insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. Now, that assumption was being questioned. Humanity had expanded too quickly, their technology advancing at an unnatural rate. They had not only survived wars that should have eradicated them, but had emerged stronger after each one. Their ability to innovate, adapt, and evolve in real time was unlike anything the Dominion had ever recorded. So, the mission was simple: find out if humans posed a threat. And if they did, prepare for their elimination. Vor'Xel stood in the observation deck of the concealed Dominion station orbiting Earth, staring down at the planet below. It was an unremarkable world by Dominion standards: moderate gravity, nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, a mix of land and water with an unusually high biodiversity. The humans themselves were fragile creatures. No natural weapons, no biological defenses that stood out against other species. Physically, they should not have survived as long as they had. And yet, they thrived. Command Overseer Ral Tor stood beside him, his rigid posture reflecting the authority of the Dominion. His voice was cold, efficient. You will deploy immediately. Your identity has been crafted, your disguise perfected. Blend in, observe, and report. Do not make contact beyond necessity. Vor'Xel nodded. He didn't need a lecture. He had done this before. He activated the biomimicry suit, feeling his body shift as the technology morphed his appearance, restructuring his bones, organs, and vocal cords until he was indistinguishable from human. The disguise was perfect. Within moments, Agent Vor'Xel ceased to exist. In his place, Ethan Carter, a financial analyst from New York City, was born. His first days on Earth were uneventful. He walked the streets of New York, took public transportation, visited coffee shops, and engaged in casual conversation. Humans were emotional, social, and largely predictable. They were creatures of habit, bound by routines, driven by simple needs: wealth, security, status, companionship. Their governments were chaotic, their systems filled with inefficiencies, their leaders flawed and corrupt. But as he observed deeper, something felt off. There were inconsistencies in human behavior that defied logic. A group of people could be paralyzed by fear in one moment, yet display unmatched bravery the next. They could be brutal and violent, yet capable of deep compassion and sacrifice in ways that went beyond evolutionary survival. And then there was their intelligence. Humans lacked the natural computing power of the Dominion, yet they solved problems at speeds that should not have been possible. They did not merely innovate, they improvised. Their technology was not the result of slow, methodical refinement like other species. It was chaotic, filled with brilliant mistakes and impossible leaps forward. A species like this should not exist. Yet here they were. On the fifth day, Vor'Xel noticed something strange. He was sitting in a coffee shop, monitoring human interactions, when he saw a homeless man playing chess in the corner. The man was unkempt, his clothes ragged, his presence mostly ignored by those around him. Yet, he was playing against a rotating group of opponents: businessmen, students, even a retired professor. And he was winning. Vor'Xel moved closer, pretending to observe casually. The man's eyes flicked up and met his own. For a second, Vor'Xel felt an unexplainable discomfort. "You're not from here, are you?" the man said. Vor'Xel's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Excuse me," the man chuckled, moving a piece across the board. "I don't mean this city. I mean here." Vor'Xel forced a small smile, the way humans did when they were amused but dismissive. "I've lived in the States my whole life." The man studied him for a moment, then shook his head. "No, you haven't." Vor'Xel remained silent. The man moved his final piece. "Checkmate." The opponent groaned in frustration, shook the homeless man's hand, and left. The man turned back to Vor'Xel. "You should be careful," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "There are some things you're not supposed to know." Then, he stood and walked out of the shop, leaving Vor'Xel with a feeling he had never experienced before. For the first time in his career, he felt like he had been caught. But that was impossible. No human should have been able to detect him. Over the next few days, Vor'Xel became increasingly aware of small, unexplainable things. People looked at him a fraction of a second too long before speaking. Strangers greeted him by name before he had ever introduced himself. Technology around him glitched at random, as if resisting his presence. It was as if the entire planet knew he didn't belong. The Dominion surveillance logs suggested humans were just another species, just another civilization on the rise. But standing among them, walking their streets, looking into their eyes, he wasn't sure anymore. And then, the final confirmation came. A single notification appeared on his secure Dominion transmitter, hidden in the apartment he had rented. "We see you." No sender, no traceable origin, just those 3 words. For the first time in his career, Agent Vor'Xel felt fear. Vor'Xel stared at the screen. 3 words. "We see you." His fingers hovered over the interface, his mind racing. His Dominion-issued transmitter was a secure line, encrypted beyond human comprehension. Even if Earth's top intelligence agencies had access to advanced computational systems, it would take them centuries to break through his defenses. Yet someone had, and worse, they had left no trace. He ran a deep system scan, searching for signs of an intrusion. Nothing. The device was functioning perfectly, as if the message had simply appeared from nowhere. That wasn't possible. But then again, nothing about this planet made sense anymore. The next morning, he left his apartment, blending into the rush of humans heading to their daily routines. He told himself he was imagining things. Coincidences, glitches, paranoia. But as he walked through the crowded streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. People moved just slightly out of sync with what he expected. When he crossed an intersection, cars slowed a moment too soon, as if their drivers anticipated his movements before he made them. The same barista who had served him the past 3 mornings didn't ask for his order today. She simply handed him his coffee with a small, knowing smile. He checked his apartment for surveillance devices. None. He scanned for tracking signals. Nothing. But the feeling would not leave him. Someone knew, and they were letting him know that they knew. By the 5th day, Vor'Xel began mapping human behavior in greater detail, searching for inconsistencies, trying to pinpoint what exactly made this species so different. What he found disturbed him. Humans had no fixed patterns of thought. Other species followed predictable behavioral models, even at the highest levels of intelligence. Every civilization had rules of logic, instinct, and reaction that governed their development. Humans did not. They broke their own rules constantly, shifting between fearless and terrified, ruthless and compassionate, reckless and calculated, sometimes all within the same moment. Their evolutionary progress was erratic, filled with illogical advancements that should not have been possible. One moment, their species was barely surviving. The next, they were building weapons capable of destroying entire planets. No species had ever advanced this quickly. No species had ever adapted this unpredictably. No species should have been capable of what humans were. And yet they were. He filed another report to the Dominion. The humans are unpredictable. Caution advised. That evening, he walked along the waterfront, attempting to clear his mind. The night air was cold, the city lights flickering against the water's surface. Then, a voice spoke from behind him. "You're asking the wrong questions." Vor'Xel turned sharply. The homeless man from the cafe stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Vor'Xel considered ignoring him. But his instinct screamed that this was not an ordinary human. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. The man chuckled, stepping closer. "You've been watching us, haven't you?" Vor'Xel's mind raced. There was no way this man should have known that. "You think we don't notice," the man continued, tilting his head slightly. "But we do. We always do." A chill ran through Vor'Xel's body. a feeling he had never experienced before. Fear. What do you know? He asked. The man gave a small, almost sad smile. I know you're not from here. Vor'Xel's instinct screamed at him to leave, to vanish into the crowd and report this anomaly to the Dominion. Instead, he found himself asking a question he never thought he would. What are you? The man's eyes gleamed with something indescribable. You've been trying to figure that out, haven't you? He took another step forward. But what if you've been asking the wrong question all along? Silence stretched between them. Then the man leaned in slightly. Maybe you should be asking what you are. Before Vor'Xel could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. He left no footprints on the damp pavement. Vor'Xel stood frozen, his mind unraveling. His breathing was unsteady. His heart pounded in his chest. He had been trained to be the perfect spy. A ghost. Untraceable. Yet, a human had seen him, had spoken to him in the exact way a superior observer would speak to a lesser being. It was the first time in his life that he felt small. The first time he considered that he wasn't the one doing the studying. Perhaps he had been the experiment all along. When he returned to his apartment, he found another message waiting for him. It wasn't on his Dominion transmitter. It was on his laptop, an unsecured human device. There was no sender, no file history, no trace of how it had gotten there. Just a single line of text. Stop watching, or we'll start watching back. The screen flickered once. Then, the message erased itself. Vor'Xel sat there in silence, his hands trembling. The mission was no longer about spying on humans. Now it was about surviving them. Agent Vor'Xel had spent years infiltrating civilizations across the galaxy. He had never been noticed, never been caught. But now, something had turned the tables on him. Humans were not supposed to be aware of his presence, and yet they were. Someone had sent him a message. Stop watching, or we'll start watching back. And the worst part? They weren't threatening him. They were warning him. Shaken, Vor'Xel sent another encrypted transmission to the Dominion. Mission compromised. Recommend immediate extraction. Minutes passed, then an hour. No response. The Dominion's relay stations were the most advanced in the known universe. They had never failed before, and yet he was met with silence. He ran a diagnostic check on his transmitter. It was working perfectly. The message had gone through, which meant the Dominion had received it. They just weren't answering. His pulse quickened. Had something happened to them? Or worse, had something happened to him? Determined to regain control, Vor'Xel set up counter-surveillance measures. He activated hidden scanners to detect tracking signals. He rerouted his communications through dozens of proxies. He checked for motion triggers, listening devices, energy fluctuations, anything that could explain how the humans were watching him. Nothing. No bugs. No cameras. No signals. Yet, every time he stepped outside, he felt them. The barista knew his order before he spoke. The waiter at the diner greeted him by name. The homeless man from the cafe never appeared again. And worst of all, he could no longer tell if it was paranoia or reality. On the seventh night, as he sat in his apartment, trying to make sense of the situation, someone knocked on his door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. No one knew him here. No one should have been looking for him. His breath caught in his throat. He did not move. The knock came again. This time, a voice followed. You should open the door. The blood in his veins turned to ice. The voice was not human. It was something else. Not mechanical, not artificial, but perfectly neutral. Like it was trying to sound human and failing. He stood slowly, his every instinct telling him to run. But there was nowhere to go. The voice came again, calm, patient. If you don't open it, we will. The lock disengaged on its own. The door creaked open, and standing there, in the dim hallway, was a man in a black suit. His face was unremarkable, his expression empty. But his eyes were wrong. The man stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Vor'Xel tensed, every muscle in his body coiled, ready to strike. The man didn't react. He simply pulled out a chair, sat down at the small table, and folded his hands. You've learned a lot, haven't you? He said. Vor'Xel did not respond. The man tilted his head slightly. You don't need to pretend anymore. We know what you are. A cold chill crawled up Vor'Xel's spine. He had spent years mastering the human persona, perfecting his disguise. It was flawless. And yet this man saw right through it. "Who are you?" Vor'Xel finally asked, keeping his voice steady. The man's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Were the ones asking the questions. The silence stretched. Then, the man placed a small black device on the table. It was smooth, unmarked, with no visible seams or buttons. "Pick it up," the man said. Vor'Xel didn't move. The man's expression remained unchanged. "It's not a request." Vor'Xel hesitated, then reached out, his fingers brushing against the surface. The moment he touched it, his mind fractured. The room vanished. He was no longer in the apartment. He was everywhere. He saw humanity's history, but not as he had studied it. He saw wars that never should have been won, battles where the laws of probability had been shattered. He saw individuals, just ordinary humans, accomplishing things that should have been impossible. And then he saw something worse. He saw the things that had tried to invade Earth before. Things from a void. Things that did not belong in any dimension, any timeline, any existence. And they were gone. Not defeated. Not repelled. Erased. Because something else had erased them. Something on Earth. Something humanity itself did not understand. And then he saw himself. Not in the apartment. Not in disguise. Not as an infiltrator. He saw himself being observed. And he realized the truth. He had never been the one watching. He had been the one being watched. Vor'Xel gasped as he snapped back into the apartment, his vision blurred, his head pounding. The man in the suit was still there, watching him. "Now you understand," the man said. Vor'Xel staggered back. What are you?" The man stood slowly, smoothing out his suit. "We are nothing special," he said. "Just people. Vor'Xel esprit va shallow." His mind was racing. "That's a lie." The man tilted his head. "Is it?" And then, just like that, he turned and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, he glanced back. "We'll give you one chance," he said. "Leave. Forget everything. Because if you stay," his expression darkened, "you won't be studying us anymore." He stepped out into the hallway. The door locked itself behind him. Vor'Xel stood frozen. He had come to Earth to study humans. And now, for the first time in his life, he was afraid of what he had found. Vor'Xel did not sleep that night. His body remained perfectly still in the darkness of his apartment, but his mind refused to obey his training. Every instinct screamed the same warning. He needed to leave. Immediately. But the problem was, he didn't know how. His encrypted transmissions to the Dominion remained unanswered. His emergency recall beacon had been activated hours ago. No response, which meant one of two things. Either the Dominion was ignoring him, or something had cut him off. The next morning, he prepared for extraction. He erased all records of his existence. His rented apartment, his fabricated work identity, his digital footprint, all gone in an instant. By noon, Ethan Carter no longer existed. By sunset, neither did the apartment he had been living in. He destroyed everything. Hard drives, devices, identification papers. Yet, no one came looking for him. He had erased himself before they could. And that terrified him more than anything, because it meant that whoever or whatever was watching him already knew where he was going next. He moved to a smaller city, blending into the background of human society once more. This time, he avoided all patterns. He stayed in a different hotel every night. He ate at different locations, paid with physical currency, changed disguises constantly. And yet, it didn't matter. The first night, he noticed it. A man in a black suit, watching him from across the street. The second night, the same man, sitting 3 tables away at a diner. The third night, 2 of them. They did nothing. They never approached. They simply watched. And Vor'Xel knew exactly what they were doing. It was what he had done to so many others. They were studying him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. On the 4th night, he made his escape attempt. He memorized every street, every alley, every possible exit route out of the city. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., he left his motel and started running. Not on foot, not in a vehicle, but using everything he had learned from human behavior. He blended in, slipping between groups, changing appearances in real time, avoiding all surveillance angles. For a moment, he almost believed he had made it. until he turned onto a street that didn't exist. It should have led to an open avenue. Instead, it led right back to where he started. He turned again. Same result. No matter which way he moved, the city rearranged itself. His exits were gone. And then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "You can't leave." He spun around, pulse racing. A woman stood there, dressed in black, her expression unreadable. She was not one of the suited men. She was something else. "You were never supposed to be here," she said. Vor'Xel steadied himself. "Who are you?" She ignored the question. "You were given a warning. You didn't listen." Vor'Xel took a slow step back. "I don't understand. What are you?" Her head tilted slightly. "You still think this is about what we are?" Her voice was calm, measured, amused. "That's your mistake. You should have asked what you are." Something about her words sent a wave of dread through him. It was not a threat. It was not an attempt to intimidate. It was pity, like she knew something he didn't. Something about him. "You've been watching us," she continued. "But what if I told you that you were never really watching?" His mind raced. "What does that mean?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "It means you've been looking at the wrong thing all along." She took a step closer. "And now that you've seen, they see you too." Behind her, the world changed. Not physically, not in any way he could describe, but something shifted. The very fabric of existence itself felt different. He suddenly became hyper-aware of everything around him. Every shadow, every sound, every breath of air, none of it was real. Or rather, it was more real than it should have been. As if he was seeing the world for the first time, stripped of all illusions. Stripped of whatever had been keeping him blind. And what he saw was impossible. The woman watched his reaction carefully, then exhaled softly. "This was your last chance." Her voice was quieter now. "You need to leave. You need to stop searching." Vor'Xel es moet was dir y. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Because if you don't, something else is going to find you." And then, she was gone. No movement. No flash of light. One moment she was there. The next, she wasn't. Vor'Xel stood alone in the empty street. For the first time in his life, he felt like a cornered animal. He had come to Earth to study humanity. And now, humanity had studied him. But the worst part, the thing that truly terrified him, it wasn't them that he feared anymore. It was whatever they were afraid of. And if humanity was afraid, then something far worse was out there. Waiting, watching. And now it knew his name. Vor'Xel's instincts screamed at him to move. He sprinted through the empty streets, his enhanced senses scanning for an exit. There had to be a way out. But no matter how fast he ran, the city didn't behave the way it should have. He turned corners that looped back to where he started. He moved through alleys that should have led to open roads, but didn't. Every escape route folded in on itself, trapping him in a maze that shouldn't have existed. This wasn't human technology. It wasn't an illusion. It was something else. Something he didn't understand. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he ever would. Vor'Xel activated his emergency beacon, a direct transmission to the Dominion. Agent Vor'Xel to command. Extraction required immediately. Mission compromised. Earth is not what we thought it was. Static. His transmitter flickered, then a response came through, but it wasn't from the Dominion. A voice, distorted and layered, filled the device. "Why do you think they will answer you?" His blood ran cold. It was not the Dominion. It was them, whoever or whatever they were. "You're not in control here," the voice continued. "Not anymore." Then, against all odds, his transmitter activated again. A clear signal. A familiar voice. "Vor'Xel, we have your location. Stand by." It was the Dominion. He didn't waste time questioning how they had broken through whatever interference had been blocking them. He just ran. Above, the sky split open as a Dominion stealth ship broke through Earth's atmosphere. It was fast, powerful, equipped with enough weapons to level a city if necessary. As the ship descended, the side hatch opened, revealing a squad of heavily armed Dominion operatives. "Move! Now!" His commander's voice barked through the communicator. Relief flooded him. He leaped forward, sprinting toward the extraction zone. 10 meters. 5. He was almost there. And then, the ship disappeared. Not exploded. Not shot down. It simply vanished. 1 second it was there. The next, it was gone, as if it had never existed at all. Vor'Xel skidded to a halt, staring in disbelief. This wasn't a human attack. This wasn't a weapon. It was something else. A force beyond his comprehension had just erased a Dominion warship from existence. Noreki, no trafe, nothing. His hands trembled. And then he heard footsteps. He turned. A man in a black suit stood at the edge of the street, watching him. There was no fear in his eyes, only understanding. "You still don't get it, do you?" the man asked, stepping closer. Vor'Xel took a step back. "What did you do to my ship?" The man shook his head. "It was never your ship." The man took another step forward. "You still think this is about humans?" Vor'Xel's heart pounded in his chest. "Isn't it?" The man exhaled softly, as if disappointed. "No, it's about you." Vor'Xel's entire body went rigid. The man tilted his head. "You thought you were here to study us, to learn about human nature, human behavior, human civilization." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "But did you ever stop to wonder why you were really sent here?" A cold chill ran down Vor'Xel's spine. "What are you talking about?" The man simply stared at him. "Did you really think you got past our defenses so easily?" Vor'Xel's mouth went dry. No, it wasn't possible. He had infiltrated hundreds of species, countless worlds. But now, he wasn't sure if he had ever been in control at all. The man studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Vor'Xel couldn't bring himself to answer. Because he had. The inconsistencies, the anomalies, the patterns that didn't make sense. The fact that his mission had never truly begun, because it had already been compromised before he ever landed. "Why?" he whispered. The man's expression was unreadable. "Because they needed you to see." Vor'Xel es twisted. Who? Who needed me to see? The man's eyes darkened. "The ones who were watching before you even arrived." Vor'Xel staggered back. Not because he didn't believe it, but because he did. And suddenly, for the first time in his life, he wished he had never come to Earth at all. The air grew heavy, the sky darker than it should have been. Something shifted in the space between them. Something unseen. The man's voice was quiet. "You need to leave. Now. Vor'Xel es poltergeist." "I can't." The man nodded slowly. "I know." And then, just as before, he was gone. No movement. No sound. One moment he was there. The next, he wasn't. Vor'Xel was alone. Or at least, he thought he was. Then, from the darkness, a new voice spoke. A voice that did not belong to anything human. Too late. Vor'Xel stood frozen in the empty street. The night air was cold, but it wasn't just the temperature that chilled him. It was the presence. A voice had spoken from the darkness. Not the man in the suit. Not a human. Something else. Something that had been watching him long before he had started watching them. "Too late," it had said. And Vor'Xel knew, with every fiber of his being, this was not a threat. It was a fact. He turned slowly, expecting to see something standing in the shadows. There was nothing. And then he noticed it. The city around him had changed. Not physically. The buildings still stood. The street still stretched out before him. But something was off. The air felt heavier. The lights flickered, even though there was no power outage. And the sounds of the city, cars, distant sirens, human voices, were gone. Not faded, not muted, gone. As if the entire world had stopped existing around him. And he was the only thing left. A wave of pressure pressed down on him. An overwhelming force impossible to define. He had never felt anything like it before. It wasn't telepathic. It wasn't a physical attack. It was pure awareness. Something was looking at him in a way he could not comprehend. Not through eyes. Not through technology. Through existence itself. His disguise, his body, his very identity felt irrelevant under that gaze. As if he were nothing more than an idea, a concept to be studied and discarded. Then the voice came again. "You were never supposed to see." Vor'Xel gasped, his vision blurring at the edges. He tried to move. His body did not respond. Tried to think. His thoughts were not his own. And then the truth poured into him. His mission had never been about observing humanity. It had never been about spying on Earth. The Dominion had sent him here because they were afraid. Afraid of something they did not understand. And now, neither did he. Flashes of images, memories, moments filled his mind. Wars that should have wiped humans out but didn't. Advancements that defied probability. Survivors who should have died but walked away unscathed. Events that made no logical sense, yet happened anyway. And then something worse. Something beneath all of it. Humanity was not the anomaly. Humanity was not the secret. Something else was. Something that used them, protected them, bent reality around them. Something that was not human but existed within them. And whatever it was awake now, and it had noticed him. The force surrounding him tightened, pulling at the edges of his consciousness. Vor'Xel tried to scream. No sound came. You thought you were watching, the voice whispered. But you were only ever looking at the surface. The city flickered. For a brief moment, he saw beyond it, beyond the illusion. The sky was wrong. The buildings were hollow. And the humans, they were not what he had thought they were. They moved like normal, spoke like normal, lived like normal. But something else lived through them. Something that had been there all along. Waiting, watching. And now that he had seen it, he could never unsee it again. The pressure reached its peak. Vor'Xel's vision darkened. His body began to fade. Not die, not dissolve. Fade, as if he had never existed at all. He tried to resist, tried to move, to fight, to call out. But there was nothing to fight. He was not being attacked. He was simply being removed. Not out of malice, not out of anger, but because he had seen something he was not meant to see. And the thing that had noticed him did not allow mistakes. As the last fragments of his mind slipped into the void, one final thought surfaced. The Dominion would send more spies, more observers, more fleets, but it wouldn't matter. They wouldn't find him. They wouldn't find anything. Because whatever force protected humanity, whatever lived beneath the surface of reality itself, it had already won, and it had been watching the entire time. Deep within the heart of the Galactic Dominion, a high-ranking war council awaited a report that would never come. Agent Vor'Xel had been deployed to Earth several cycles ago. By now, he should have returned, or at the very least, sent a transmission. Yet, there was only silence. And the Dominion did not like silence, especially not from a planet as insignificant as Earth. Overseer Raltor, the one who had personally assigned Vor'Xel's mission, stood before the High Command. "We have received no further transmissions," he stated. His voice was steady, professional. But beneath his words was something unspoken, something no one in the room dared admit. Their agent had not been captured, had not been killed. He had simply vanished, as if he had never existed at all. And that was far more disturbing than any failure. The council debated for hours before a decision was made. They would send more teams. Not a single agent this time. Not one observer. An entire squad. Each one equipped with advanced surveillance tools, neural dampeners, and reality anchors. Devices meant to prevent any form of mental or environmental tampering. They would land in secret. They would find Vor'Xel, and they would bring him back, no matter what had happened to him. The infiltration teams descended to Earth with precision. Their ships cloaked, their disguises flawless. No human military, no government organization, no intelligence agency detected them. They spread out, tracking Vor'Xel's last known location. His apartment no longer existed. His digital records were erased. The very memory of him in human databases was gone. It was as if he had never been there. But they didn't panic. This was expected. They had planned for such countermeasures. What they hadn't planned for was the fact that no human they encountered seemed to remember him. The first true anomaly came when they interrogated a shopkeeper who had interacted with Vor'Xel daily. "Have you seen this man?" they asked, showing a projection of his last disguise. The shopkeeper frowned. "Never seen him before in my life." The agent's visor confirmed the man was telling the truth. Every human they asked gave the same response. They weren't lying. They genuinely had no memory of Vor'Xel, even those who had spoken to him daily, even those who had worked with him, even those who had met him just days before. The agents moved to more concrete methods. Security footage, traffic cameras, network logs. All of them should have recorded his movements. Instead, there was nothing. Where Vor'Xel should have been, there was only empty space. Street cameras showed people talking to thin air, Building logs showed an apartment that had never been rented. Bank records showed transactions that had never happened. It was impossible, and yet it was the only reality that remained. Realizing that something far beyond their understanding was at play, the Dominion agents did what they had been trained to do. They retreated. They returned to their hidden extraction point, activated their deep space transmitters, and sent a single transmission back to the Dominion. Mission compromised. Extraction requested. Something is wrong. No response. They sent it again. Silence. One last time, on an emergency encrypted channel that could not be blocked. Nothing. And that's when they saw it. Their ship was gone. Not destroyed. Not taken. Gone. Like it had never existed. One of the agents, Commander Velcor, was the only one left. His squad? Missing. His ship? Erased. His communications? Silent. Everything that had been sent to find Vor'Xel was disappearing one by one. And then he felt it. A presence. Not human. Not alien. Something else. Something that had been waiting. He turned. Standing in the distance was a man in a black suit. Expressionless. Unmoving. Watching. And Velcor finally understood. The Dominion never heard from any of them again. The War Council waited. Days passed. Weeks. No reports. No transmissions. No distress signals. The infiltration team had simply vanished. And soon, the Dominion did what all intelligent civilizations eventually learn to do when faced with something that should not exist. They stopped looking. The Dominion erased all records of Earth from its archives. They removed it from navigation charts, classified it as a dead zone, sealed all transmissions regarding Vor'Xel's mission. Earth was no longer a target, not because it was protected, not because it was dangerous, but because it was something else entirely, something that had made itself very clear. It did not want to be studied. It did not want to be watched. And those who did simply ceased to be. No one spoke of Earth again. The Dominion moved on, conquering other systems, expanding its reach. And yet, somewhere in the back of every high-ranking officer's mind, there remained a quiet, unspoken rule. Never go to Earth. Never interfere. Never send probes. Never ask questions. Because they knew Earth had seen them, and if it ever looked their way again, they would not survive what it found.